Are you looking for a podcast that is beholden to no one except you? You have found patriots willing to take on the establishment. Welcome to Cracker Culture, with your hosts Smokin Joe and Ford O'Connell. We're taking names and kicking ass. Join us as we confront the issues of politics and expose the corruption. Many of our politicians are opportunists. We intend to keep you informed. It's time to hold them accountable. Join us. We are not trying to be anyone's voice, just trying to help you be your own. We love you, Florida. You can find us at Smokin Joe YouTube, Cracker Culture YouTube, and most streaming platforms. Love, peace, and gator grease.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining Ford O'Connell and I for this episode of Cracker Culture, the podcast for real Floridians. I'm Smokin Joe, and before we get started, I want to tell you about Farmer Joe's Fresh Market, located at 1401 Southwest Pine Island Road in beautiful Cape Coral, Florida. Farmer Joe's is currently closed for repairs due to the hurricane, but will be reopening soon. Farmer Joe's guaranteed the greatest grocery store in all of Lee County. Hey, Ford, we're days away from the real beginning of the holiday season. I don't know about everyone else, but here in the South, it's a very competitive time. The men are wagering on their favorite team for football, and the women are trying to outdo each other's casseroles. With Biden inflation, does that mean Thanksgiving dinner will look different this year, Ford?
Well, I think that we have a lot to be thankful for when it comes to family and gatherings. But one thing that I think many people across Florida aren't going to be thankful for is the most expensive Thanksgiving on record. According to the American Farm Bureau, this year's Thanksgiving is going to cost 37% more than the 2 years ago, and birds this year are up $10 more than they were last year. So people are scratching their heads because of Biden's out of control inflation.
It's incredible to me. Traditionally, turkey is kind of one of the cheaper meats. Used to be, not no more. It seems like you might as well go get a filet this year instead of a turkey,
Well, you raise an interesting point, Joe. It might actually, depending on the size of your family and gathering, actually be cheaper to eat out this year than to stay at home with a family. And it's not just the bird, as we're talking about. Rolls are up 40%, stuffing's up 30%. You name it, the things that makes Thanksgiving special besides the family and the fellowship is the food. And unfortunately, I don't know where we're headed, and I think a lot of people may not be having turkey this Thanksgiving.
Well, now you're gonna go out of town for Thanksgiving, aren't you, Ford?
I'm going to Las Vegas, so the turkey cost is going to be the least of my concerns. It's the lost wages in America's playground that's my concern.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the actual bird. The bird is
well, everybody knows that the bird is a word.
So Trump got reinstated on Twitter. Everybody's a buzz about that bird, unlike the Thanksgiving bird that's $10 more. Everybody's flipping out. The liberals are threatening to leave Twitter. One company left Twitter off for about 1 day and come right back on. I'm trying to remember who it was, but it was a big company.
It was CBS News. They took a 40-hour hiatus. But I think that's the point, Joe, is that the media bemoans Twitter and bemoans Elon Musk because he's an advocate for free speech. But what CBS's News is telling you is that Twitter is a drug for journalists because they need to be on the inside of the information and news gathering, and also the ability to protect their own brand management. But I will say this, advocates of free speech, since we're on Thanksgiving, can be thankful that Elon Musk reinstated Trump.
Well, one of the things that he done, and it was perfect, he reinstated Trump from January 6th. The first thing that popped up on his reinstatement was Trump telling people to not riot, to be peaceful. None of that was put out there until
Well, that's the point. I think that Elon Musk sees the fallacy in the Democrats' insurrection narrative that is a false narrative to begin with. I think what's going to be interesting here is to see whether other social media companies in their Trump ban as well, because what I will tell you about is I think why the media, the corporate media, and the Democrats are seething and they're furious is because essentially Elon Musk won't bend the knee and deplatform the people that they want to see deplatformed. And I think it's a larger political point is that the Democrats are blowing their tops over this because essentially they believe that if they can't control what you see and read on social media and who social media censors, then they may lose political power.
Well, I even seen where the president of Mexico reached out to Elon Musk to reinstate Trump. I mean, you know, it's pretty incredible. I mean, however, you know, speaking of that, this is a little off topic, but you know, a lot of the Mexicans that are not trying to get over here illegally, they love Trump. Trump's the man. I mean, they really do. I mean, you know, a lot of the migrants that get over here illegally, they like Biden for the porous border until they get over here, and then they want to go back. There was a guy from Cuba. This just happened the other day. Stole a fishing vessel to try to get back to Cuba. The vessel broke down 50 miles south of Key West. He alerted the emergency beacon. When the Coast Guard found him, the helicopter, they sent a tanker over to pick him up. His word said, I don't want to live in this shit no more. I want to go back to Cuba. That's bad when a man wants to leave United States of America to go back to a communist country because we have got that bad.
Well, I think that you've hit the nail on the head in the United States under Joe Biden, and I think it's an absolute travesty. I mean, what you see among a lot of Hispanics, particularly in South and Latin America and in the Caribbean, is they like Trump because he stresses family. He stresses the ability to make your own money and to protect yourself and your national sovereignty. He also is a big advocate against the Chinese Communist Party. And I'll tell you something, we got the Chinese Communist Party 90 miles off the coast of Florida and the Bahamas, throughout Latin America, heck, even in Mexico with the fentanyl trade. And we have to be very cognizant of it. And who's the only person talking about China? One Donald J. Trump.
Well, I was going to talk about this a little later, but since you brought that up here, let's just go ahead and move on down to this right here. You tell me, you said they're in Mexico, the CCPS. Well, they're here too. Let's just look at this.
It's been reported that the Chinese Communist Party are operating police stations in the United States in an effort to surveil Chinese dissidents. It seems obvious the U.S. shouldn't allow its most significant geopolitical rival, an oppressive communist regime, to establish police stations in the U.S. What authority or jurisdiction does the CCP have in the U.S.? And I don't know which one to testify.
Well, Senator, like you, I'm very concerned about this. We are aware of the existence of these stations. I had to be careful about discussing our specific investigative work, but to me it is outrageous to think that the Chinese police would attempt to set up shop, in New York, let's say, without proper coordination. It violates sovereignty and circumvents standard judicial and law enforcement cooperation processes. And the reason this is so important is because we have seen a clear pattern of the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, exporting their repression right here into the U.S. And
Now, see, here's the thing I've got a problem with right here. The Director of Homeland don't know whether this is okay or not. How do we not know whether it's okay or not for the Chinese government to put a police department in New York City? How? And nobody from the Department of Defense, nobody can tell us exactly that what they're doing is legitimate or not legitimate. That makes no sense to me that we don't know how a foreign country is operating within our country, and we don't know whether it's right or wrong.
Well, hat tip, first of all, to Florida Senator Rick Scott for pressing the FBI Director Christopher Wray on this. And you're absolutely right, Joe. Okay, it appears, based on reports, that the Chinese Communist Party is not only violating international law, they're violating agreements because they're spying on dissidents in New York City and possibly other places in America. And we know they're doing it around the world. And what we're also finding out later in that sort of crossfire on the Senate floor was that we find out that the Chinese are actually also spying on U.S. citizens, not just Chinese citizens, putting bugs in their cars. And the way they sort of get around it is by hiring private investigators. I've said this before, and I'll say this again. The Chinese Communist Party is the greatest threat to America in the 21st century and to all of humanity. And the longer it takes us to understand that, the worse off we're going to be.
Yeah. And here's the thing, what they're doing, these Chinese police departments, they are, like you said, they're also looking into United States citizens, but if they've got a Chinese national here, they watch them, they look for their opinions, and if their opinions don't align or seem to go away from what the CCP wants, they either encourage them to go back to China for trial, or they try their family that's still in China. It's so unfair, and for us to rest on our laurels and allow this shit to happen in the United States is beyond me. It should never, ever even be questioned. And for our leaders that are here to protect us to not know if it's allowed, that shit's got to be changed.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the one thing the FBI director is right, that the top export of China is not actually goods and services, it's repression. But they're also, the Chinese are buying up farmland across the United States next to military bases. And I believe the Dakotas and Texas, they're trying to stranglehold our food supply as well. They are not our friends. And no amount of being nice to them is going to change their global intentions to not only be the military, but the economic power of the world going forward. And every day we choose to turn a blind eye to the Chinese Communist Party is going to be a bad day for America. I'll be honest with you. You and I are children of the Cold War. And I will tell you that the Chinese Communist Party makes the Soviets look like a Disney movie.
Well, you know, you brought something up, us being children of the Cold War. We grew up, and I remember, you know, ducking our heads under desk and you know, watch out the Krasna bullshit. They're coming after us, you know, the Red Square, all this stuff. You know, I heard all that until I went over there. And here's my take on being over in Russia or Ukraine or any of those. The citizens are just like us. They're being bullied around by political elites, and the average citizen has no clue, much like Americans, what's really going on in government. They only get surface knowledge, and that's a sad thing. As Americans, we have succumbed to surface knowledge, and we've accepted it.
Look, I think you're absolutely right. I think the big difference between the Soviets or the Russians that we grew up with and the Chinese Communist Party is that in a lot of cases, that was under Stalin, you know, you name it, Putin. Now, that is a military regime that's holding power by sort of cutting off its citizenry. In the case of the Chinese Communist Party, the entire country and the entire religion is the Communist Party, and therefore they control not only top down but bottom up. It's a very different type of repression, and it's one that comes complete with a credit score and AI surveillance. I mean, we should really be worried, and apparently very few people are outside of Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, and Donald Trump.
Well, Rick's got a lot of bad press over the years, but I like Rick. I think Rick's done a tremendous job, and going forward, I hope to see people like Rick Scott stand up more, because we really need people that's going to stand up. And a lot of the people that we have backed and we have looked to stand up has failed us, and especially on like the January 6th prisoners. A lot of candidates told us they was going to go fight for these prisoners, and they've sat there and not said a damn word and let them people rot in jail.
Well, look, I absolutely agree with you. I think the fact that you basically have people from January 6th who might have trespassed on the Capitol in D.C. gulags basically being treated like prisoners at Gitmo is absolutely insane, particularly after what you see with the riots and the violence of the Summer of Love that the media and the Democrats turned a blind eye to because it was the type of riots that they like. My concern with the Chinese Communist Party is they're throwing money all around Washington, D.C. and state capitals across this country, and it's going to have to take, how shall I say, a more well-heeled individual like Rick Scott or Donald Trump to be able to stand up to them, because I'm telling you something, they're not just buying off the Democrats in Washington, in Tallahassee, they're buying off the Republicans too.
Well, I think a lot of the Republicans, when they're dealing with Donald Trump as their leader, they seem to be a little bit more risk taking in what they say. You know, they'll say things that they normally wouldn't say in light of being more political or presidential or whatever. And I think we need more of that, like Rick Scott.
Well, I think what you're saying is the reason why they felt more free to speak with Donald Trump is because they felt that they had political cover. What you're asking for, and I totally agree with you, regardless of party, is having a backbone. I mean, you need to be professing freedom, and you need to be fighting for it every single day as a politician, whether you're at the local level, the state level, or the national level. And if you're not doing that, you're no good to the people that you represent.
Yeah, well, you know, I'm supposed to discuss some of these things later tonight on the show, and I've been kind of got two shows blended in and trying to keep forward. But when we look at these things, we have a lot of politicians that, again, like I said, that I backed, we backed, I felt like it's let us down. And then we have the GOP who's finally come out and said that they were going to investigate Joe Biden, not Hunter Biden, but Joe Biden, which, you know, that's, we always got an investigation, but we never have no outcome. And I'm tired of that. We've been investigating Trump or somebody for what, the better part of 8 years and ain't seen nothing.
Well, I think that that's the worst part of politics right there, Joe, is that investigations have become political tools rather than actually getting to the truth of the things here. And one thing that does hearten me is that the House Oversight Committee is going to investigate Joe Biden's family's questionable dealings in China, Russia, and Ukraine. I think it's important. You made a great distinction here. One that I often make on the Fox Business Network is this is not a Hunter Biden story. This is a Joe Biden story. And the question is very simple. Is he compromised by foreign governments like China? And two, is he making money off of the taxpayers' dime while he is president or vice president of the United States? I think the people have a right to know, because we're talking about national security and corruption.
Well, let's see what they said right here in just a couple seconds.
Whistleblowers describe President Biden as chairman of the board for these businesses. He personally participated in meetings and phone calls. Documents show that he was a partner with access to an office. To be clear, Joe Biden is the big guy. This evidence raises troubling questions about whether President Biden is a national security risk and about whether he is compromised by foreign governments. In the 118th Congress, this committee will evaluate the status of Joe Biden's relationship with his family's foreign partners and whether he is a president who is compromised or swayed by foreign dollars and influence. I want to be clear. This is an investigation of Joe Biden, and that's where the committee will focus in this next Congress.
Man, look, that sounds great, but some of the same players are in the background. And look, I like Byron Donalds. I really do, but I think Byron Donalds has let us down when it comes to stepping up to some of these things, especially January 6th. Do you think that this committee will actually do their job and bring out the true dirt?
I think they're going to try to do their job. My concern is whether or not they'll have the resources and understand that they need to do this in a quick, relatively quiet way until they really have something that they can push out there. Let me give you an example. We were talking about CBS News earlier in Twitter. Do you know that it took CBS News? Let me look at my notes here. 768 days to acknowledge that the laptop was actually Hunter Biden's. We're fighting against far more nefarious things and evil things than just the Democrats here when it comes to people understanding that this story really, really is bad. And if 1/10 of what we hear about 10% of the big guy is true, it should have Americans across the country talking about it.
Well, you know, the key thing they said is the president compromising the threat to United States security. How could you not think he was compromised? I mean, I've never known of any president that had so much smoke around him for people to act like there's no fire. I mean, please, sorry, this clown, he's been compromised before he ever got into office, and you know, it don't get no better than what you see. What do you think is going to come out of this? You can't find how much more you're going to find to actually admit, hey, we've got a problem here.
Well, part of it is to make sure that people also understand the story here, and so far the media has blocked it. I mean, look, to your point, the compromise, we're talking about being compromised with the Chinese Communist Party, which we just talked about is the worst evil in the 21st century. We're talking about Russian oligarchs, Ukraine, which just seems funny considering we're throwing weapons down a hole with trillions of dollars with no accountability. That kind of raises a lot of red flags right there. This is America's most nefarious political rivals in unstable regions of the world, and all of a sudden no one's asking anything. And I promise you, to your point, if 1/100th of this was said about Donald Trump, we'd actually have a lockdown in Congress and we'd be running it morning, noon, and night on the news.
Well, I said all along, had it been Eric Trump or one of Trump's children that had that laptop, it would have been over with by now.
It would certainly be the most famous laptop in the history of the world. And you're right, it absolutely would be. But that's the whole point about today's Democrats. They often talk about putting country before party, but they always put party before country, and twice on Sunday. And that's why I'm worried. I'm not sure. So to bring it back, I hope they get to the bottom of this. Will Joe Biden eventually, be thrown out of office because of it? Probably not. But it's important that the voters know about this going into 2024. Hope springs eternal, my friend.
Well, Joe Biden, being the president, of course, he's going to be the turning point for most news that we look at. He's what everybody either wants to get rid of or find out what stupid thing he's going to say next. I want your opinion on what he done here. He kicked the press out of this press conference, and tell me what's going on right here, Ford.
Mr. President, can you tell us what you know so far about the explosion in Poland, sir?
Thanks, President.
Why was he doing the whole this meeting, sir?
Guys, we're walking out.
Cool, thank you. Let's go. Thank you.
He's sitting there with that Mensa Trudeau, who I just literally cannot stand. I mean, every time I see him, I just want to. But he's sitting there and he just says, no, nothing, no.
Well, one of two things. One, he either knows that this was in fact a Ukrainian missile and the entire story is completely bogus, or he's just asleep at lunch and talking about Trudeau about, whatever they're going to do next. I mean, you're talking about two of the most clueless leaders in the world who have two of the better countries. Well, we have the greatest country, but Canada's a pretty good country too. And they just seem to be like, go along, get along, don't really care, just make the press like me, and I can keep being president or prime minister.
Well, I'm looking at the money that's going over to Ukraine, and I'm looking at the people that's pushing for this money, and it is Trudeau and Biden. And if you look at Trudeau's country, and his people are outraged with his leadership, he's the Liberal Party. I'm amazed at how they handled their government versus ours, because they stand up and scream at each other, and then they sit down and they scream at each other. I mean, it ain't like, well, I proposed this bill and this and that. And pretty much whatever Trudeau states is what it's going to be. I mean, it's horrible.
Well, there's no question about it. You're talking about the parliamentary system in Ottawa, Canada, and to be totally honest with you, it's a parliamentary system. Works a lot more like the British, but we'll put it this way. Socialists are about 70% of Canada, while what we'll call moderate Republicans are only 25, 30%. So the only question is what kind of socialism you're going to get every time Trudeau speaks. But I think you raise a larger question here, and that is it seems like the moderates, both parties in the United States and the mainstream media are itching for the U.S. to get into World War III over Ukraine, that we have little glitches like this story out of the Associated Press talking about missiles in Poland that could be Russia. I mean, if Joe Biden and this administration hadn't eventually copped to the truth, who knows where we'd be right now? And that's the unfortunate thing. It seems like people are pushing for this war rather than trying to figure out what's really going on.
Well, I got a friend, and he lives over in the United Kingdom. He lives in Hull, but he is Ukrainian. He's from the Donbass region. And I talked to him, and you know, those Ukrainians told me before this war ever started, some of my friends, they told me before this war ever started that some of the elders believed that what Zelensky was doing was for the betterment of the government. But these younger groups said it's nothing. This is Biden in bed with Zelensky, and it's the ruination of their country, which I think their country was ruined before then, but they're not pro. These actual citizens in all these countries, Canada, Ukraine, United States as well, are not happy with the leadership, yet we just keep getting things we don't want forced in our throat. Inflation, higher prices in food, gas, everything. It's forced on us when we know there's a better way. Trump showed us a better way.
Well, look, I think you're right. I mean, we just had a midterms where Republicans took back the House, won the congressional vote or popular vote by 4%, which is nothing to sneeze at, but we kind of underperformed and we didn't take the Senate. But in the United States, unlike in Canada and some of these other countries, we can't call snap elections. So whoever you put in there is going to be in there for 4 years. And, you know, I think what seems to be confusing here is that when it comes to Ukraine and this war with Vladimir Putin, Joe Biden seems to think that the best way that he can win re-election is to make sure that the U.S. takes part in this war. And I think that that's all the wrong reasons to be tangling with Vladimir Putin, who, by the way, I absolutely despise. But to your point, when it comes to Donbass region, this has been going on for the last 10 years, the sort of back and forth with Eastern Ukraine and Russia.
Oh, yeah, it is. I feel sorry for the actual citizens in Ukraine who don't want no part of this, because there's a lot of them that don't want no part of this. And, you know, I guess just like any country, you're loyal to your country no matter what. You're going to stand up and fight for your country. But there's a lot of people not liking the fact that they're having to fight for this going on right now.
Well, no, there isn't. But I'll tell you, this is, at least with Eastern Ukraine, it's been going on for a long time. And part of it also has to do with Vladimir Putin and oil. And we bring it back to climate change. And when I look at what's going on, and the Europeans are sort of bitching, if you will, about the price of gasoline, we are too. And what do I see? I see the Democrats trying to choke off U.S. production. I see the Europeans trying to choke off their production. The best way to fight against Vladimir Putin is to open up all the spigots, because then Ukraine will have money and we'll have money, and we can go back to actually doing what we prefer to do, which is taking care of our friends and family.
And the sad thing is, a lot of the Democrat people believe Biden when he says, I've gave out all kind of leases for oil. They just won't use it. They don't tell the actual what goes into those leases. They're not usable.
You look, I know many years ago, Joe, something you didn't know about me was I was an oil and gas expert. My grandfather and family was in the oil and gas business for a very long time. And that's exactly right. He's just using a sleight of words. we are producing 1 million barrels less per day of oil. And that's why you see him draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to sort of cover that shortfall so that the prices don't go up even more. People would really be going insane if he wasn't draining the SPR, which again is hurting our national security. But Biden's whole goal, and he said this over and over, and on day one he signed an executive order, and that was to choke off U.S. oil and gas domestic production. And people have to realize that on the world stage, our ability to produce oil and natural gas is probably our greatest national security and strategic benefit.
How can you have so many people that know this? Now, you know, the people in Washington know this. The people that's signing the bills and voting on this stuff, they know this. Why do they allow it to keep on? Why don't more people stand up? Why don't more Republicans stand up and say, hey, wait, somebody needs to not shut up until something's done.
Greedy lobbying money. It's the same thing that goes on in Tallahassee as well. It's the same problem here. This money in politics, and the lobbyists are paying them basically to keep quiet. Or the Republicans decide, you know what, I can try to push for more oil and gas, but I can also do this other thing that might be more politically beneficial. I think the Republicans are sitting on their hands, and it's sad because they believe that essentially the misery index hasn't gotten high enough for the voters to truly understand how bad Joe Biden's destroying this country.
Well, you know, that Strategic Petroleum Reserve, that was not designed for Joe to lower the price of fuel. That was designed for, like, we just had a hurricane here. That was designed to help out in times of disaster and crises. And he is pretty much, if we had a major disaster, I don't even know that we could, a major disaster, I don't even know that we could have enough of fuel in our strategic petroleum to cover it.
I totally understand. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve was built in the 1970s to do exactly what you said, to help us in time of natural disaster, hurricanes, earthquakes, you name it, so we could get and pipe oil across the United States where it was needed. It was also meant, we used it during Iraq when we were in Desert Storm to actually power some the troops on the battlefield. It's meant for the military and for natural disasters. And the more you have it filled up, the better off it offsets the price of oil around the world. So the idea was never to actually touch the Strategic Petroleum Reserve until you had to. And what's even crazier about this is that Donald Trump wanted to fill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to the brim for $26 a barrel, and the Democrats shot it down on the House floor, claiming it was a handout to big oil. Today, as you know, oil is over $90 a barrel. So guess what? That's money that the U.S. can't afford under Joe Biden.
I just don't understand, because this is not a natural disaster. This is a man-made disaster, and the folks that voted in this particular presidency, they pretty much trying to defeat America, it seems like. My question is, since we went through the midterms, we've got, like you said, the GOP is strong. Are we able to reverse any of this stupidity that has come from Biden with us taking over the House, or we just got to wait it out?
Well, I hope we can find a way to reverse course, but I just don't think the Democrats are going to listen to us, because they don't think America, by and large, at least the Democratic leaders in Washington, D.C., think America is a special place. They think that we're the evil aggressor on every front, and that if we destroy and dismantle America's natural gas and oil, that the rest of the world will follow. I mean, I don't understand why they're so hell-bent on destroying this country, but I guess that comes along with white liberal guilt.
Well, I look at it this way. All the folks that talk about how bad they've got it in the United States, I don't believe they've ever been to a third world country. Just for a day. Even through like Philippines, go through Manila, where you see all the families on the street, little kids begging for money. If you see that here in the United States, you're going to see that in primarily a neighborhood that's already basically a socialist neighborhood, because they're funded by by government benefits, and they can't have no more than what they're getting, because if they do, they lose their benefits. So we've already
You made
created
a great point. I think that as Americans overall, whether you're Republican or Democrat, we're privileged and we don't recognize it, and we're completely ungrateful. I will tell you, though, sadly, the third world is coming to America, because I don't know if you saw, but Mexico was basically running a commercial against fentanyl, showing American streets, not Mexican streets, to warn their own citizens about how bad that can get.
Yeah. Well, I do. I watch a lot of South American news feeds, and the one thing that blows my mind is this new leader of Venezuela. They love him. Why?
I can't answer that for you. I just will tell you that there's been so much turnover in Latin and Central America right now. I mean, even in Brazil, you've now got a socialist. I just hope that a lot of them recognize that the Chinese Communist Party is coming to take everything they have, and the people there are so desperate and poor that they're willing to believe anything if they think it can give them a brighter day. And they have to realize it's all fool's gold, and that essentially the best thing going in our hemisphere is the United States.
Well, you talk about fool's gold. That's just like those refugees that are coming, they're trying to get over into Mexico to get to the United States. The UN supplies a bus for them to get back and forth over there. What you don't know is the UN is charging these migrants like $10 a head, or they don't go. And so you are promising people help, but you're profiting off the help. And this is the United Nations doing this.
Well, I think the United Nations and how they've been trafficking humans towards the United States for decades now is absolutely ridiculous. And they're not the only ones doing it. They're just one of the biggest offenders. You've got a whole bunch of nonprofits and immigration lawyers that are trying to traffic misery onto the United States just so they can make a buck. I've said this over and over. People need to understand illegal immigration is not a victimless crime, and people that do come across here illegally need to be put in jail and then eventually deported, because you're talking about fentanyl, the death of the migrants, and our social safety net. Our social safety net is meant for American citizens and not for the rest of the world.
And, and there's different pockets, there's different places in Mexico where they're not seeing the same impact that you're going to see over by Eagle Pass or Tijuana. And I was a friend of mine that's over in Mexico. He's over in Nayarit, Mexico. He called me just the other day. I said, well, how is it over there? And he said, oh, everything's fine. I said, everything's fine? He said, yeah, over here, we're on the beach.
Well, that's exactly the point, though. There are folks in Mexico that are making money off this, just like we have drug cartels. We have a human trafficking cartel, and causing too many problems in Mexico is not good for business when your sole goal is to get people to the United States.
Right. Well, I hope that something will change, and it just seems like that the stupidity is never ending, and that nobody even tries to. Sorry, I got a cat trying to jump on my damn keyboard here. No, I'd like to see that people just use some common sense when it comes to all the political things that we deal with. The average person, like we've discussed before, they don't have a clue about part of the stuff me and you discuss, but they should.
They absolutely should. I mean, we're talking about something so simple like oil and gas. This is something we use every single day. Like Alfie talks about seed the table. Let's talk about how I get oil out of the ground and put it into our car, and it's in everything we use. And I think this ignorance on the part of America, I mean, look, I know people lead busy lives, but they're also choose to be ignorant. That's a great freedom we have in America. And unfortunately, if we don't become better citizens about our immediate daily lives, I'm afraid America is going to go down the toilet.
I agree with you, Ford. Ford, we're coming up on the end of this show. I want to tell you and Sarah happy Thanksgiving. I hope y'all enjoy your travels and stay safe on your way to Vegas. Win big.
Hey, I appreciate it, my friend. I wish you and Jesse the best as well. And I just hope that this Thanksgiving is one where everyone just takes 5 minutes to enjoy the things that they have, because just in a blink of an eye, we may not have what we have in front of us at this moment, and we always need to be thankful.
100%. Ford, I'm thankful for your friendship. Folks, we're thankful for you watching. If you want to do anything in the world for us, we'd be very thankful for you to share this video. Like, share, subscribe. But the most important thing you can do is share. Me and Ford will be back with you next week after Ford returns with several $1 million from Las Vegas and brings some over here to old Smokin' Joe.
You got to watch about though, because the IRS.
We love you, Florida. Love, peace, and gator grease. I'm out.
At first I was an egg, I was petrified, kept thinking I'd be lost or I'd get cracked and fried. But you took me to your nest before it was too late and kept me warm, and you held me